Brother got my fiancée pregnant before our wedding. Now my family wants me to forgive them. But I told them to FK off and moved away. Have you ever been betrayed by someone so close that it felt like your world shattered into a million pieces? This is not just a story about betrayal. It's a story about love, family expectations, and the ultimate journey to healing. The truth is, I never saw it coming until I did. But when I tell you about how everything crumbled, you will see why I made the choice to leave behind everything I once thought I knew. I had been in love with Sarah for 5 years. She was brilliant, funny, compassionate, and quite possibly one of the most beautiful people I had ever met. We met at a party hosted by my brother, Mike. He was dating one of Sarah's friends at the time, and by some twist of fate, our paths crossed, and it felt like magic. For once in my life, something just clicked. It was as if all the years of playing second fiddle to Mike, all those moments of being overlooked, suddenly didn't matter. Here was someone who loved me for who I was. And after 4 years, I knew I wanted to marry her. Mike had always been the golden child. Ever since we were little, he was the one everyone doted on. If he got a new toy, I got his hand-me-down. If we both got straight A's, Mike would be treated with gifts and accolades, while I get a pat on the back. But I tried to ignore it. As we grew up, the differences between us only widened. Mike dropped out of community college after 1 semester, while I put myself through a 4-year program, working 2 jobs. My parents lavished praise on Mike for his entrepreneurial spirit, even when his business ventures continually failed and drained their savings. Meanwhile, I worked an entry-level position, striving to build my career. When I got engaged to Sarah, I truly thought things were changing. It felt like I was finally allowed to be happy. Mike congratulated us, though there was something strange in his eyes. Something that made me pause for a moment. I brushed it aside, thinking it was my own imagination, my own paranoia that perhaps Mike wasn't truly happy for me. But the look haunted me. For the next year, Sarah and I were knee-deep in wedding plans. Our jobs were demanding, our schedules tight, and though we barely had time for each other, I told myself it was only a phase. Everyone said wedding planning was stressful. I knew that beneath it all, we were still connected, still in love, so I ignored the red flags, the late nights out, the mysterious texts, the vague excuses. She was always busy with friends, or meeting a business colleague. And I trusted her, until one evening, 4 months before our wedding, when Sarah sat me down. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, and she could barely meet my gaze. When she said she was pregnant, I felt my heart swell. We hadn't planned it, but the thought of a baby, our baby, made my heart race with excitement. But then her voice broke, and the words that came next changed everything. "It's Mike's," she whispered, and the world stopped. Everything fell apart in that moment. My brother, the one I had grown up with, the one I had tried so hard to get along with, had been having an affair with my fiancée. And now, she was pregnant with his child. I kicked her out that night. I couldn't stand to look at her. And the next day, I called Mike. I don't remember exactly what I said. It was a blur of anger and pain, a cacophony of years of resentment spilling out all at once. He tried to brush it off at first. It was a mistake. He said, a drunken fling, but I knew it was more than that. And the betrayal cut so deep, I didn't know if I'd ever be able to heal. My parents, as always, took Mike's side. When I told them what had happened, they urged me to forgive him, to support Sarah throughout her pregnancy. Family comes first, they said. You need to grow up and forgive. But how could I? How could I stand by and pretend everything was okay? I had been betrayed by the 2 people I trusted most. And the child, the ultimate symbol of their betrayal, was something I couldn't bear to think about. For weeks, I isolated myself. I took time off work. I avoided friends. I barely ate or slept. My parents kept calling, demanding that I make things right. Even extended family members, some of whom I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly felt the need to weigh in, telling me I was being childish and selfish. They wanted me to forgive and forget, but I knew that was impossible. The lowest point came when Mike showed up at my apartment. He was smug, dismissive, as if what he had done was nothing more than a minor mistake. The anger I felt in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And when he laughed at my pain, I lost it. I swung at him, my fist connecting with his jaw, and suddenly we were fighting like we were kids again. Except this time, it wasn't a petty sibling rivalry. This time, it was years of anger. Years of feeling overlooked and ignored. Years of being the less important brother finally coming to the surface. After that, I knew I had to make a change. I filed for a restraining order against both Mike and Sarah. I couldn't keep living in the same city, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next confrontation. So I made the decision to move. I accepted a transfer to my company's Seattle office, packed up my things, and left. It wasn't easy. Leaving behind everything I knew, everything I had worked for, felt like giving up, but I knew that if I stayed, I would never be able to heal. And slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I found a small apartment, threw myself into my work, and began to make new friends. It wasn't perfect. There were still nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the memories of what had happened threatened to overwhelm me. But I knew that I had made the right choice. I learned a lot from what happened. I learned that family isn't always about blood, it's about the people who truly care about you. The people who stand by you when everything falls apart. I learned that sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away, even if it feels like the hardest thing in the world. And I learned that healing takes time, but it is possible. To anyone who has ever been betrayed, to anyone who has ever felt like they weren't enough, know that you are. Know that you deserve better. And know that it's okay to let go of the people who hurt you, even if they're family. In the end, I found peace not by forgiving those who had hurt me, but by forgiving myself, for staying as long as I did, for believing in people who didn't deserve my trust, and for finally choosing to put myself first. This experience taught me that not all relationships, family or romantic, are worth salvaging. Betrayal doesn't always have to be forgiven, especially when the offenders show no true remorse. Take, for example, the story of Clara, a woman I met at a support group. Clara's best friend of 10 years had an affair with her husband. They begged for forgiveness, claimed it was a mistake, but continued to see each other behind her back. It took Clara years to finally walk away. But when she did, she said she felt like a weight had been lifted. She moved to a new city, started a new career, and found happiness again. Another example is Mark, a colleague of mine. His brother stole from his business, leaving him bankrupt. Despite the pressure from his family to reconcile, Mark chose to cut ties. He worked tirelessly to rebuild his company. And today, he's more successful than ever. He told me once that forgiving his brother would have meant allowing himself to be vulnerable to that kind of pain again. And he wasn't willing to do that. Sometimes, the best thing we can do for ourselves is to let go. To walk away from the people who hurt us and to start over. Even if it means leaving everything behind. It might be the hardest decision you ever make, but it could also be the one that saves you. For me, moving to Seattle was the beginning of my journey to healing. It was the first step in taking back control of my life, of deciding that I deserved better. And if you're going through something similar, I hope you find the strength to do the same. Not all relationships are meant to be saved. Sometimes, walking away is the most powerful thing you can do. Betrayal is painful, and the scars it leaves might never fully heal. But you have the power to decide what kind of life you want to live, one filled with resentment and pain. Or one where you take control, choose happiness, and leave behind those who do not deserve you. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about survival, about finding the courage to let go, and about understanding that your worth is not defined by how others treat you. It's defined by how you choose to rise above it all. Left my fiancée due to her *sive family. Weeks later, she's gone forever. I uncovered affairs and lies that shattered our entire friend group. The sky outside was an ominous shade of gray, a reflection of the heaviness hanging over my heart. I looked out the window, my mind churning over the last few months, the shouting, the disarray, the uninvited intrusions. The burden of having to live between love and chaos was slowly suffocating me. But this was a journey I never expected to make alone. And yet, here I was, standing at the crossroads, the weight of a ring on my finger feeling more like a shackle than a promise of forever. She was the love of my life, my fiancée. I had thought we could overcome anything together. But the problem wasn't us. It was the people around her, people who should have cared for her, protected her, celebrated her victories. Instead, they tormented her, and their poison seeped into our lives. Her family, abusive, toxic, unyielding, created a chain around her soul that she couldn't break. They were the darkness to her light, and it was suffocating us both. She had told me about her past, her family. I remember the night she first opened up, sharing painful memories of her father's cruel words, her mother's manipulations, and her brothers, who treated her as nothing more than a burden. Yet, despite all the abuse, she sought their approval like a flower reaching for the sun, only to be scorched again and again. She wanted their love, and I wanted to be her salvation. We were planning our wedding, and it was supposed to be the happiest time of our lives. But her family's demands never ceased. They treated her like an ATM, and every visit to our house was a storm of chaos. They would come unannounced, bringing their criticisms and their greed, leaving messes behind as if our home was their playground. Her father would drink my beer. Her mother would criticize the way I organized the kitchen. And her brothers, they would trash the place and laugh about it. I tried to talk to her, tried to show her what they were doing to us. I was patient. I loved her. After all, she'd look at me with tears in her eyes, a mix of sorrow and fear. She promised she'd do better, set boundaries, try to keep them away. But every time they called, she would give in. It was a cycle, one that she was too afraid to break. And I was getting lost in the chaos, my love for her turning into exhaustion and resentment. One day, I told her I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't see a future where her family's toxic hold didn't eventually choke the life out of us. I couldn't see us raising children in such an environment, where their grandmother would belittle their mother, where their uncles would treat their home as a dumping ground. I wanted more for her, for us, for the family we had dreamed of. I gave her an ultimatum: either we cut them out, or we cut this off. She was silent, her face pale and her hands trembling. She told me she needed time, and I foolishly gave her that time, thinking that maybe, just maybe, she'd realize what she needed to do. Days turned into weeks, and her family's visits only got worse. Her mother's sneers grew bolder, her father's drinking more frequent, and my fiancée? She was slipping further away from me, her silence screaming of the fear and conflict within her. One night, she came home and found me sitting at the table, the engagement ring I had given her resting in front of me. I looked at her and I knew that she couldn't let them go. I loved her, but I couldn't marry her if it meant being tied to that family. I told her I was leaving, and it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Her tears broke me, but I couldn't stay. Weeks later, I heard the news. She was gone forever. The family that had tormented her for years had finally pushed her over the edge. My heart shattered, and the guilt washed over me like a tidal wave. What if I had stayed? What if I had fought harder? But deep down, I knew I couldn't have saved her from them. Only she could have done that. My world felt empty without her. But I knew I had to move on. I moved back to my home state, found solace in the arms of old friends and family. They helped me heal, helped me remember who I was before the chaos had consumed my life. I began to rebuild, slowly, painfully, and then, I met her, someone who reminded me that love didn't have to be painful, that it could be gentle and kind. She was different. She had her own past, her own scars, but she had faced them, conquered them. She wasn't looking for anyone to save her, she was whole on her own. And in her, I found hope again. We took things slow, cautious not to repeat the mistakes of the past. We laughed together, cried together, and learned what it meant to truly love someone without the weight of 1,000 chains. As time went on, I learned to forgive myself for the past, for leaving, for not being able to save her. I realized that we all have our battles. And sometimes, love just isn't enough to fight someone else's demons. My fiancée had been a beautiful soul, one that had been too broken by the people who should have loved her most. I had tried to love her enough to fix it, but in the end, it wasn't my battle to win. I remember one particular evening with my new partner, where we sat on the porch of her small house, the summer breeze gently brushing our faces. She had just shared a story from her childhood, a story of resilience, of how she overcame her own toxic family dynamics. There was strength in her words. And as she spoke, I realized how different it was from the helplessness I had felt with my fiancé. This new love was one forged in independence and self-respect, rather than desperation for validation. She had her own demons, but she had fought them and won. There was no sense of victimhood, only growth and empowerment, and in her strength, I found my own, the ability to let go of the guilt. To accept that sometimes you can't be someone's savior, no matter how much you love them. We can't rescue people from the cages they keep themselves in. They had to find their own way out. We made new memories together. We traveled, something I had never been able to do with my fiancée because of the constant fear that her family would cause another crisis. We spent weekends hiking, exploring the beauty of nature, and finding joy in the simple things. We laughed. We danced in the kitchen to old songs. We built a life that felt steady and secure. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be in a partnership where we were both equals, each carrying our own weight, and lifting each other when needed, not out of dependence, but out of love. There were still moments when the past haunted me. I would see something that reminded me of her, a book she loved, a song she used to play on repeat, and the memories would come flooding back. But now, those memories didn't hurt as much. Instead of regret, I felt a bittersweet sadness, an understanding that I had loved her as best as I could. And that sometimes, love just isn't enough to fix what's broken inside someone else. I visited her grave one last time before I left town for good. I brought her favorite flowers, sunflowers. She used to say they were a symbol of hope, always turning towards the light. I stood there for a long time, thinking about everything we had gone through. I whispered a goodbye, and for the first time, I felt like I could truly let her go. I knew she was at peace now, free from the pain her family had caused her. With my new partner, I learned about healthy love, the kind that doesn't come with conditions or ultimatums. We went to therapy together, not because we had problems, but because we wanted to ensure we were building a solid foundation. We learned how to communicate, how to listen without judgment, how to be there for each other without losing ourselves. It was the kind of love I had always wanted, but never knew how to achieve. One day, we were sitting in a cafe, and she looked at me with those kind eyes of hers, and she said, "You know, you're allowed to be happy. You don't have to carry the weight of the past forever." And it hit me. I had been punishing myself for so long, believing that I didn't deserve happiness because I had walked away from someone who needed me. But the truth was, I deserved to be happy. We all do. We deserve to be loved in a way that lifts us up, not drags us down. As the years went by, we built a family of our own. We had a child, a beautiful little girl who brought more light into my life than I ever thought possible. I looked at her and promised myself that I would be the kind of parent who always lifted her up, who always made her feel loved and supported. I wanted to give her the kind of childhood my fiancé had never had, one filled with love, warmth, and security. Sometimes, when I look at my daughter, I think of my fiancé. I think of the children we had dreamed of, the life we had wanted to build. And I hope, wherever she is, that she knows I loved her, that I tried. I hope she knows that she deserved so much more than what life had given her, and that I wish she could have found the strength to break free from the chains that held her down. My new partner and I taught our daughter about boundaries, about self-respect, about the importance of surrounding herself with people who lift her up, not tear her down. We wanted her to grow up knowing her worth, knowing that she never had to settle for less than she deserved. And as I watched her grow, I saw the future that I had once dreamed of, a future filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities. In the end, I hope my story helps others recognize the power of letting go, the importance of setting boundaries, and the strength found in self-love, because only when we love ourselves can we truly love others the way they deserve to be loved.